Elizabeth Holmes had a dream, and that dream was to take her multi-billion-dollar company Theranos and turn it into a vanguard of medtech innovation. Millions flocked to her support, while thousands sang praises of her. But it only took a handful of whistleblowers to reveal that the only thing she's innovated over the years were lies. In this video, we'll be looking at Theranos under a microscope to see through the deception that fooled everyone for years. This is the story of the Theranos fraud. Make sure to stick around until the end to see how she almost got away with it. The pitch. This business story starts out like most other successful businesses today, with a college dropout. Elizabeth Holmes was 19 when she started Theranos, a company revolving around one new medtech innovation she had called the Edison machine. The Edison machine was meant to do away with the vials of blood you usually had to take for your regular blood work and reduce it to just a single pinprick, and the best part, it was even cheaper. Now at the time, Elizabeth was still a student at Stanford, studying to reach her chemical engineering degree. But as most millionaires in the past have shown, you don't really need that college diploma to do great things. So instead of fully familiarizing herself with the tech world, she opted to drop out and focus on her company. She was so invested in her company that she even used the money her parents had saved up for her tuition as capital to help pump the business onto its feet. But to take off, a business needed more than just capital. Being a college dropout in the medical field didn't look good on paper, so she had to get a competent team around her. Thankfully, health experts, politicians, businessmen, and other influential people joined her at the table. Swayed by her determination to revolutionize the medtech world, she was practically rounding up the Avengers of making change happen. The star-studded board of directors was enough to catch the attention of multiple high-profile investors, shelling out millions at a time. At the age of 30, Elizabeth Holmes was already heading a company that was valued at well over $9 billion. And because she owned Theranos, she also owned more than half of that $9 billion pot. She began making waves on mainstream media, showing up on the cover of Forbes and even on Time magazine's 100 Most Influential People. Heck, even Joe Biden was singing her praises. Her company's value proposition just seemed too good to be true, because it really wasn't. The catch. Don't let the songs of praise fool you. There was a lot going on behind the scenes, and John Carreyrou was sure to get to the bottom of it. John Carreyrou is a decorated writer in possession of not one, but two Pulitzer Prizes for journalism. John Carreyrou had the eyes and ears for news, and what he heard was surprising. Since investors were too busy throwing cash at Theranos, no one ever bothered to ask the question, how? Of course, Theranos did have bioengineering experts that knew how to throw jargon at whoever tried to ask. But to John, they just weren't digging deep enough. And so he went digging. As it turns out, not only was Elizabeth Holmes a Stanford dropout, she also dropped out extremely early. Sure, geniuses can self-teach, but creating life-warping technology should take more than that. Whistleblowers started coming up out of the woodworks. As it turns out, Theranos had a pretty harsh working environment. Dazed and confused. The head chemist and supposed expert of the company was firm when it came to one thing. Edison was going nowhere, and the test results all showed negative feedback. To normal people, this sounded like a great time to stop while they're ahead. But for Holmes and her partner Ramesh Balwani, they simply needed a new chemist. So to replace their head chemist, they hired a dermatologist. The people in charge obviously had no idea what they were doing, and when asked about the tech that the company was famous for in the first place, they would simply shrug it off. The most alarming part about this was the test reports, all of which were monumental failures. Every test result that came back from Theranos' testing was fundamentally incorrect, and Theranos was doing its best to keep these test results away from the public and their own employees. Thankfully, none of these blood tests led to any fatal consequences, though there was the occasional panic attack when a blood sugar test would tell you have cancer.
Mr. White?
Yes.
You understood what I've just said to you.
Yes. Lung cancer. Inoperable.
So with all this chaos happening in the company, you must be wondering why no one spoke up sooner. That's because all the employees were actively being threatened by the top dogs to never speak up about anything they find in the company. Board members themselves weren't safe either, but they were met with a little extra cash on the side. All these lies and more were documented and expounded thoroughly by John. leading to a huge expose being published in the Wall Street Journal. This article lit the match that sent the FDA into a frenzy, and everything they found just proved John's article right. Blood in the water. As Theranos promised all their tests would only take a single drop of blood, that's also all it took for Theranos to shut down. This fall was everything but graceful. The FDA found violation after violation when they started digging deep into Theranos. Along these violations was the falsification of records given to stockholders, confirming just how much profit the company was making. Holmes knew that with the mountains of evidence proving her guilt, all she could do was deny. Holmes clapped back at the article, saying that it was nothing more than a hit piece and that the article proved nothing. She even had the gall to countersuit John for the tell-all article that exposed her. If there's one thing good about Elizabeth Holmes, it's that she's a pretty good liar. Surprisingly enough, the employees that remained with the company started rallying behind her, most of which were probably still too afraid to jump ship or were just paid better. Theranos was crashing down, and all the bad rep that Elizabeth Holmes had drawn the company had to disappear along with her. That's why in 2018, Holmes would step down as CEO. She and her then business and life partner, Ramesh Balwani, would be charged with criminal fraud for misleading investors and making outright false claims about the medicinal effects of her company's tech. After 3 months, the company itself would officially shut down as well. So while the company was effectively flushed down the toilet, their lies and malpractice still remain. The trial. You cannot rush perfection, and the American justice system takes this to heart. Elizabeth Holmes' trial went underway 3 years after the end of Theranos, and some big changes have happened since then. One of the big changes was the separation of Ramesh and Elizabeth, with Elizabeth now being married to a wealthy heir. Elizabeth Holmes was tried for intentionally feeding her investors and patients misleading data. Hundreds of companies lie to their investors every day, but it seems that Theranos put up the biggest lies yet. During the Theranos raids, it was discovered that Elizabeth had been misdeclaring company profits to keep investors shoveling money in. The patients themselves were told that the blood tests were correct and routed through the infamous Edison machine. But in reality, most of the tests were taken using other machines. This trial would bring more disturbing truths to light. Claims of sexual assault and manipulation were suddenly brought into the conversation, with Holmes claiming that Balwani was the mastermind of the operation and simply manipulated her into committing the fraud and profiting off of it for years. This claim was of course refuted with all the evidence stacked against her, including text messages and emails showing her own enthusiasm and willingness to commit fraud for the sake of earning more money. Although her and Balwani were already separated at the time, this didn't mean his hands were any clearer. Balwani was an accomplice to the crime, helping Elizabeth with her fraudulent activities. Balwani himself was sentenced to almost 13 years in prison for his crimes, a much steeper cost compared to Holmes' own punishment. The aftermath. After all the court drama that ensued, Holmes was sentenced to 11 years in prison on counts of fraud, a slap on the wrist considering the damage she's done to investors and to the patients that put their trust in her. While she's actively serving her sentence, media junkies have already taken to feasting on the story, turning her story into a movie and a book. So while her prison sentence may only last 11 years, her legacy will most likely transcend lifetimes.